You a prosecutor? Dressed like that? Driving this piece of junk? The officer's laugh was sharp, loud, and laced with contempt. A baton hit the taillight. Crack. Glass flew like ice under boots. Ayanna Brooks didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She stared him down. This wasn't just a traffic stop, it was a warning. But he had no idea who she was. At just 30 years old, Ayanna had already climbed the ranks to become a federal prosecutor in one of the most demanding U.S. district courts. That morning, she was simply trying to get to work, to open a high-profile trial. Instead, she was profiled, mocked, and vandalized in broad daylight. But what happened next turned one woman's humiliation into a legal earthquake. This is not just another racist story, it's a fight for dignity, power, and justice at the highest level. If this story hits you, subscribe now and tell us where you're watching from plus what time. Let's talk about what really happens when silence ends, and a voice like Ayanna's rises. Ayanna Brooks had no idea that a routine drive to the federal courthouse would end with shattered glass, a destroyed vehicle, and a national scandal. The morning had started like any other. Ayanna, a 30-year-old black woman and newly appointed assistant U.S. attorney, dressed sharply in a fitted black blazer and crisp white blouse. She looked like she stepped out of a legal magazine, poised, young, and brilliant. Today was a big day. She was set to deliver opening arguments in a high-profile fraud case. As she sipped her coffee and reviewed her notes at red lights, the downtown skyline came into view. She was focused. Confident. Ready. But just 2 blocks from the courthouse, red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Calmly, Ayanna pulled over, double-checked her registration, and rolled down the window. A white police officer approached, mid-40s, square jaw, tight fists. License and registration, he barked before even greeting her. Ayanna blinked, then offered both with a polite, "Good morning, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop?" The officer looked at her papers for less than a second before eyeing her cracked left taillight. Driving with a damaged taillight is illegal. Especially in this neighborhood. "I understand," Ayanna replied evenly. "The crack happened last week in a parking garage. It's still functional. I've scheduled a repair." The officer scoffed. "What are you doing downtown anyway, dressed like that? You cosplaying Law and Order?" "I'm a federal prosecutor," she answered, her voice measured. "I'm due in court in 20 minutes. That was the moment something changed in his eyes. Mockery flared. "Prosecutor? Sure. You people always got some fancy story." He turned, walked to the back of her car, and without warning, pulled out his baton. Ayanna froze. A second later, crack, glass flew from the taillight. She gasped, stepping out instinctively, hands visible. "Sir, what are you doing?" The officer turned toward her, furious. "Don't play innocent. You don't get to look at me like you own this city. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't moved. This is abuse of authority." Another swing. The other taillight shattered. Shards scattered on the pavement like pieces of something sacred, her dignity, her safety, her trust. People across the street stopped. A few pulled out phones. But no one intervened. "Get back in the car or I'll write you up for resisting," he growled. Ayanna didn't move. She simply stared at him, no longer with fear, but with cold, burning clarity. "You're going to regret this," she said softly. The officer laughed. "What's a girl like you gonna do, cry to your boyfriend?" She calmly pulled out her phone and hit speed dial. "U.S. Attorney's Office, Internal Affairs Division," she said aloud. "This is Ayanna Brooks. I need emergency dispatch, incident on 12th and Halston. Officer name tag reads, Miller. Immediate response requested." "This is not a drill." The officer froze. "You're lying," he hissed. Ayanna held the phone to her ear. "Sir, you're now under federal review." The person on the other line responded quickly. "Copy that, Ayanna. Stay on scene. Backup is en route." Ayanna took a single step back toward her broken car. Then turned to him. "You didn't just smash a taillight, Officer Miller. You just smashed your entire career." Behind her, more phones were recording. But Ayanna didn't flinch. She was no longer just a target, she was the system. And it had just awakened. The moment Ayanna ended the call, a strange silence fell over the street. The officer, now clearly shaken, stood still for a beat, his baton hanging loose at his side, his breath loud in the morning stillness. He had expected fear, maybe tears. But not this. Not poise. Not power. Not federal backup. Ayanna stepped back toward her car, careful not to step on the scattered glass. She opened the door slowly and leaned in to retrieve her briefcase. Inside was her official badge, her court file, and a sealed folder with confidential documents for the trial that was supposed to start in less than an hour. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. From fury. A righteous fury burning in her chest like wildfire. "You stay right here." Officer Miller snapped, suddenly trying to regain control. "I'm still issuing a citation." Ayanna stood upright and faced him, locking eyes. "You're not in control anymore. And I'm not your suspect, I'm your witness." A few bystanders had now stepped closer. A young Latina woman held up her phone, recording steadily. A delivery driver muttered, "This guy's done." No one said it aloud, but everyone could sense it. This wasn't just a stop. This was a spectacle. A rupture in the illusion that power always silences truth. Moments later, a black SUV pulled up to the scene, federal plates. Two men in suits stepped out, badges visible. One was Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Lynn, Ayanna's colleague. The other was Special Agent Natalie Jenkins, Internal Affairs. "Miss Brooks?" Jenkins asked briskly. "Yes," Ayanna replied. The officer's face went pale. "Wait, what is this? I didn't do anything wrong." "Sir," Jenkins said firmly, "you've been recorded destroying private property during a traffic stop without cause. We will need your badge and weapon pending investigation." "This is insane," he protested, stepping back. "She's lying. She said she's a prosecutor, but look at her, driving that beat-up car." Michael Lynn stepped forward. "She's my colleague. And her taillight was still functional. We already pulled traffic cam footage. You just vandalized government-assigned property while verbally assaulting a federal employee." Miller's voice cracked. "I didn't know." "That's the problem," Ayanna interrupted, stepping between them. Her voice was calm but icy. "You didn't care to know. You looked at my skin, my clothes, my car, and decided I was nothing." He stood speechless. "You think a prosecutor has to look a certain way? Speak a certain way? Drive a certain kind of car," she said. "What you smashed today wasn't just a light. It was the illusion that people like you get to decide who belongs in power." Natalie Jenkins took out a small camera. "Officer Miller, please turn around. You are being temporarily detained pending official review under U.S. Code Title 18 Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law." As she handcuffed him, a few onlookers clapped. Ayanna looked away, jaw tight, eyes glossy but unbroken. She didn't want applause. She wanted accountability. A tow truck arrived, followed by another court vehicle. Ayanna's damaged car was photographed and logged. She was offered a ride. For a moment, she hesitated. She stared at her reflection in the cracked window, young, black, fierce, but exhausted. Then she nodded. "Let's go," she said. "We have a case to try." As they pulled away, Officer Miller stood beside the tow truck in cuffs, his eyes following her like a man who'd finally realized the weight of his actions. But it was too late. Ayanna wasn't just returning to the courtroom. She was returning with evidence, with witnesses, and with a personal case for federal prosecution. The story wasn't over. It had only just begun. Inside the federal courthouse, Ayanna Brooks didn't head straight to the courtroom as planned. Instead, she walked briskly to the U.S. Attorney's office on the third floor. Her usual confidence was there, but this time it was sharper, fueled by a sense of duty not just to her job, but to herself. She pushed open the glass door and was immediately met by her boss, U.S. Attorney Denise Monroe, a formidable black woman in her 50s with steel-gray eyes and a voice that could silence a room. "Brooks, what the hell happened?" Monroe asked, her eyes scanning Ayanna's scuffed heels and the lingering shards of glass on her blazer. Ayanna exhaled. "Officer Gary Miller." Traffic stop turned violent. He smashed both taillights, called me a liar, mocked my title, on the record. Internal Affairs has already detained him. I want to press full federal charges. Monroe stared at her for a long second. Then she nodded. "Let's move." Within 20 minutes, a full task force was assembled in the U.S. Attorney's conference room, Internal Affairs, civil rights attorneys, federal investigators, and court liaisons. Ayanna stood at the head of the table, presenting as if it were just another case, except this time, she was the victim. She played the traffic cam footage, the street audio, the civilian videos. Each angle captured the brutality, the language, the intent. No edits needed. The truth was uncut and undeniable. A young agent spoke up. He didn't even flinch. He just destroyed the lights. Like it was nothing. Monroe leaned forward. It wasn't about the car. It was about control. Power. Who gets to wear the badge, and who gets questioned for wearing a suit? There was silence. Then Monroe added, "This isn't just a disciplinary case. We're pursuing this as a federal civil rights violation. Ayanna, you'll serve as both lead complainant and co-counsel." Ayanna's eyes widened. "You're sure?" "Yes," Monroe said. "You're the one he tried to silence. You'll be the one who makes him answer for it." As the meeting broke, Ayanna returned to her office briefly to collect her thoughts. Her court file for the original fraud case sat untouched on the desk. She picked it up and stared at it. Life had a strange way of flipping priorities. But she was ready for both battles. Later that day, news broke online: federal prosecutor alleges abuse by local officer, investigation underway. It spread like wildfire. The thumbnail showed Ayanna mid-sentence, brows furrowed, holding the fragments of her shattered taillight before a sea of microphones. That night, Ayanna returned home to dozens of missed calls and messages. Friends. Colleagues. Civil rights organizations. Even her mother. "Baby," her mother said over the phone. "Are you okay?" "I'm more than okay," Ayanna replied quietly. "I've never been clearer." Across town, Officer Gary Miller sat in a temporary holding cell. His union rep sat across from him, red-faced, flipping through the press articles. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Miller slumped in his chair. "I thought she was just another one of them, talking big, dressing nice." The rep slammed the file shut. "She is big. You picked the wrong damn prosecutor." Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Ayanna stood before a press podium. Calm. Measured. But unflinching. "We must stop pretending these are isolated incidents," she said. "What happened to me happens to black women across America every single day. The only difference today is, this one made the news." She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply stood, a symbol of quiet power, unwavering. And in that moment, it became clear, Ayanna wasn't just a prosecutor anymore. She was the face of a larger reckoning. 3 weeks later, a motion was filed in the U.S. District Court, the United States versus Officer Gary Miller. The charges were extensive: civil rights violations, destruction of federal property, abuse under color of law, and obstruction of justice. What shocked the public even more was the announcement that the prosecuting attorney would be none other than Ayanna Brooks herself. "Isn't that a conflict of interest?" one reporter asked during the courthouse press briefing. Denise Monroe stepped up to the podium. "Ms. Brooks is not just a victim. She is an officer of the court. And the law allows her to serve if she remains impartial and guided by evidence. This case will be reviewed at every level." The courtroom buzzed with anticipation on the day of the pretrial hearing. Ayanna stood on one side of the aisle, flanked by co-counsel Sarah Kim and two civil rights attorneys. On the other side, Officer Miller sat at the defense table beside a sharp-suited lawyer from the police union named Alan Beck. Beck rose first. "Your Honor, we file for dismissal based on prejudicial conflict. The lead prosecutor is also the complainant. This is political." The judge, a Latino federal appointee named Ramon Velasquez, raised an eyebrow. "You may argue, counselor. But as long as the law permits it, and no ethical line has been crossed, the case will proceed." Then Ayanna spoke. "Your Honor, this case is not about personal vengeance. It's about a system that must be accountable. The facts are irrefutable. This officer broke the law in broad daylight. He did so with cruelty and prejudice. And now, he will face the same justice system he tried to twist to his favor." Her voice was steady. The gallery leaned in. Cameras outside transmitted the footage nationwide. The trial began the following Monday. Ayanna opened with a statement that stopped the room cold: "There is no such thing as just a traffic stop when you're black in America. I know that firsthand." She showed the video footage. Played the audio of Officer Miller mocking her job title. Brought in the woman who had recorded the most damning angle of the attack. Then came the moment of truth. "We call Ayanna Brooks to the stand." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Ayanna walked to the witness chair, swore her oath, and sat down facing the man who tried to tear her down. Beck cross-examined her with venom. "Miss Brooks, don't you think wearing high heels and a designer blazer in a beat-up car sends the wrong message?" Ayanna didn't flinch. "No. I think it sends the right one. That your assumptions don't define my worth." Beck tried to paint her as emotional, vengeful, unprofessional. But Ayanna remained composed, answering each question with precision. Her testimony wasn't about anger. It was about truth. Then, in an unprecedented move, the prosecution called a surprise witness, Officer Jenna Ruiz, Miller's former partner. She took the stand and delivered the fatal blow. "Gary said things about women, especially black women. He joked that they needed to be put in place. I never reported it. I was scared." The room froze. Ayanna looked down for a moment, then locked eyes with the jury. The truth was no longer buried in broken glass. It stood, spoken by those who had once stayed silent. By the end of the week, the prosecution had rested. In his closing argument, Ayanna delivered her most powerful lines yet. "Officer Miller tried to humiliate me in public. But what he didn't know is this: he gave me a louder microphone. He turned his baton into my gavel." The jury was dismissed. And now, the entire country waited. It was a rainy Monday when the jury returned. The courtroom was filled beyond capacity: reporters, attorneys, civil rights leaders, and everyday citizens packed into every corner, waiting to hear whether a white police officer would finally be held accountable for a racially motivated abuse of power. Ayanna Brooks sat quietly at the prosecution table, her hands folded neatly, her face calm but unreadable. She had poured every ounce of restraint, brilliance, and personal trauma into the case. She knew the law was on her side. But experience had taught her, justice in America was never guaranteed, especially for women who looked like her. Officer Gary Miller sat a few feet away, stiff and pale. His attorney whispered something, but Miller barely blinked. The public shame had taken its toll. He was no longer the smug, smirking enforcer from that morning on 12th and Halston. He was now a man awaiting a judgment that could define the rest of his life. The clerk read the verdict slowly. On count 1, violation of civil rights under color of law. Guilty. On count 2, destruction of federal property. Guilty. On count 3, obstruction of justice. Guilty. Each word dropped like a stone into the stillness of the courtroom. Gasps. Tears. A few fists quietly pumped in solidarity. But Ayanna didn't move. Not yet. She just closed her eyes and let out one long, slow breath. The judge called for order, then moved immediately into sentencing. Given the severity of the charges and the overwhelming evidence, the sentence was swift. Officer Gary Miller, the judge began, his voice firm, your actions were not only illegal, they were emblematic of a culture that believes power can excuse prejudice. You targeted a federal prosecutor with the intent to degrade and intimidate her based on race, gender, and perceived status. The court sentences you to 7 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 4. You will also pay restitution for property damages and legal fees. The courtroom erupted, not in cheers, but in a wave of emotional release. This wasn't just about Ayanna. It was about every black woman who'd been pulled over, spoken down to, dismissed, or harmed for daring to exist in a space they were told they didn't belong. As 2 marshals cuffed Miller and led him away, he glanced back. Ayanna met his eyes, not with malice, but with finality. There was no triumph in her gaze, only truth. Afterward, outside the courthouse, microphones swarmed her again. Ms. Brooks, how do you feel? Do you see this as a personal victory? Was justice served? Ayanna stepped up to the podium, rain lightly misting her blazer. This was never about vengeance, she said. It was about visibility. About what happens when we stop staying silent. Today, we sent a message, not just to Officer Miller, but to every system that allowed him to think what he did was okay. That message is simple, we see you. And we will not look away. That clip would air on every major network that night. Back in her office, Ayanna finally sat down at her desk. The framed quote from her law school mentor stared back at her, when the law fails, let your voice rise louder than the silence it leaves behind. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother. You didn't just win, baby. You changed something. Ayanna stared at the screen for a long moment, then smiled, soft, tired, but full of purpose. Because for the first time in a long time, justice had not just shown up. It had looked like her. In a world where justice often feels distant, Ayanna Brooks reminds us that silence is not the only option. She faced humiliation not with rage, but with relentless professionalism and moral clarity. Her story shows that resilience is not weakness, it is resistance with a spine. When power abuses its badge, it takes courage to speak not just for yourself, but for everyone who can't. Ayanna didn't raise her voice, she raised the system around her. As Americans, we are taught to believe in justice. But belief means nothing without action. This is more than a racist story. It is a reckoning. If this story moved you, let it spark something. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. Like, subscribe, and stay with us, for more stories that challenge, inspire, and uncover what justice really looks like.